Investigations have fueled claims that the Guptas have bought influence in government in order to loot state enterprises. In South Africa, the scandal has already ruined the British PR company Bell Pottinger and damaged the auditors KPMG.
Andrew Harding. It's taken a month of political wrangling to come up with a government after New Zealand's inconclusive general election. Jacinda Ardern of the Labour Party will be the country's next Prime Minister after entering into a coalition with New Zealand First and the Greens. Ms Ardern has been making the noises you'd expect from a new leader, particularly one leading a coalition to government. We aspire to be a government for all New Zealanders, she said, to build a fairer country.
I feel extraordinarily honoured and privileged to be in the position to form a government with Labour at the lead. I want to thank all those who gave Labour support throughout the election and through this period of negotiation.
Her rise has been compared to that of Justin Trudeau and Emmanuel Macron. So what kind of a leader will she be? That's what I asked Patrick O'Meara of Radio New Zealand.
We know very little about her at this moment, apart from the fact that just 7 weeks ago she was catapulted into the top job when the past leader stepped down, Andrew Little, and most thought that she was too inexperienced and it was too much to ask that in 7 weeks she might be the Prime Minister of this country. But she's 37 years of age, she's very telegenic, she is a great speaker, and she really connected on the campaign trail. I think that one thing that really did help her was that very early on, when she stepped up, a media commentator questioned her on whether she was thinking of having children while being Prime Minister, and that was going to maybe affect his vote. Now, she very quickly slapped him down, saying that he had no right to ask that question, and that catapulted her in the public eye. A lot of people were very upset with the media commentator. A lot of people very much backed her, a lot of women, obviously. And she also, because she's only 37, she really picked up the young vote.
And what kind of policies can we expect her to bring in New Zealand?
The queenmaker in all of this has been Winston Peters of New Zealand First. He held the balance of power. It was his decision to decide which way he was going to go, either with National, who in fact was the biggest, they got the biggest share of the vote at 44%. Labour only got 36%. But in some ways, Labour's policies are going to be shaped by New Zealand First. Some areas, there was quite a lot of things that they had in common. One thing they want to do is they both want to curb immigration, which has been a key driver for the New Zealand economy, but it's also put a lot of pressures on the economy as well. And Labour was very strong on the fact that we've had very weak wage growth, partly due to unemployment, but Labour also campaigned very heavily on the fairness. The fact that even though New Zealand had been experiencing quite good growth by world standards, it wasn't necessarily being shared around. And I think those are some of the things that you're going to see come out when she becomes the leader and Labour have the next 3 years in power. The Greens have been very open to immigration, but New Zealand First in particular is very much questioning the pressures that immigrants have put on the New Zealanders in terms of wages, in terms of housing, and those sort of things have been very, very important to them. Labour in some ways sits in the middle. I think they would like to see an economy which is not necessarily driven by immigration, but it's yet to see how much they are willing to curb immigration growth, because we, like other nations, we actually need skilled labour in order to keep our economy going.
That was Patrick O'Meara of Radio New Zealand. Nearly 600,000 Rohingya Muslims are now known to have fled to Bangladesh from neighbouring Myanmar since violence erupted in August in northern Rakhine state. Many of the refugees are children who are now being treated in makeshift hospitals. Our correspondent Clive Myrie reports from one such clinic in Bangladesh.
You join me in the inpatient department of this clinic not far away from one of the main refugee camps here. It's run by Médecins Sans Frontières, the medical charity, and I'm surrounded by babies, children under the age of 2 months, and they're all fighting for their lives. They're all severely, acutely malnourished, and many of them have travelled with their families from across the border in Myanmar, escaping the military there and the militias who've burnt them out of their homes, and they've ended up here, and as you can imagine, it's been an arduous journey for them, and they've picked up ailments and the lack of food, the lack of water on that long trip has meant that they've ended up being cared for in here. And sadly, the doctors here have been telling me that several simply don't make it. Only yesterday, 4 actually died. Well, with me is Ian Cross. He's one of the senior doctors here. And just tell us about some of the ailments that a lot of the children are suffering from here.
The main ailments that we see are acute respiratory infections, bronchopneumonia, bronchiolitis, pneumonia. We see a lot of children who are very malnourished, and when they get chest infections like this, they find it very difficult to fight off the infection. Some of the children are premature. In the room behind me last week, we had 3 that were under 1.6 kilograms, which was pretty difficult.
It's less than a bag of sugar.
About that, yes.
You've covered a lot of emergencies in your time. This must be one of the worst.
This is one of the worst. This is one of the worst I've been involved with, completely, yes. It's shocking. I mean, I must admit, I was very moved by this when I first came. On my first day, 4 people died, and that's like, it was really shocking to me, even though I'm a bit hardened old doctor, but it was difficult for me. And this is a crisis that has been going on for such a long time. I mean, just a couple of days ago, we saw 10, 15,000 pour over the border. Sure. You're going to get more and more people coming here with their children. Yes. And we're trying our best to upgrade our facilities and our health posts to provide services for these people. MSF has gone from a team of 7 to a team of 40 in a matter of a couple of weeks. And we're not just providing healthcare, we're providing sanitation, latrines, water, building, logistics, all sorts of things.
It's the speed of this emergency that seems to have taken the world by surprise. Not just governments, but international aid agencies and the UN. And the UN, we know, is suggesting that it's ethnic cleansing that's going on. You obviously can't get into the politics of this, but all this must be heartbreaking for you to see.
Absolutely. Absolutely terrible. Yeah, you look around and tears come to my eyes sometimes. It's dreadful. You just do what you can, you know. In a way, I'm lucky that I'm a doctor. I've got my hands and my tools. I can help to make people better. If I wasn't able to do that, I'd feel so frustrated, and I'd feel even worse. But when you're hard at work, you can cope.
Well, many are thankful to you and the team here. So, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Ian Cross, one of the senior doctors here.
That was Clive Myrie reporting, and you can see Clive's full-length film looking at the humanitarian situation inside the camps by going to the BBC News website. That's bbc.com/news. Jerry's here with some other stories from our news desk.
China says more than 1 in 10 senior leaders has been investigated for corruption over the last 5 years. State media says 43 full and backup members of the governing Communist Party's Central Committee have been accused. The Central Committee comprises nearly 400 people. Fighting corruption has been one of the main policies of China's leader, Xi Jinping. The cosmetics giant Nivea has been criticised for marketing a skin lightening product in West Africa. Billboards and television adverts for the Natural Fairness Moisturiser, starring a former Miss Nigeria, have been appearing in Ghana, Cameroon, Nigeria and Senegal. A model and activist, Munro Bergdorf, who was recently fired from a L'Oreal campaign after speaking out against racism in the United States, is among those who've complained about Nivea's adverts. British opticians are warning about the dangers posed by novelty Halloween contact lenses. They say the lenses, which can give the appearance of lizards or cat's eyes, should be fitted by experts, but many are sold illegally on the internet. Badrul Hussain is an eye surgeon. He says the surface of the eye is very delicate and is easily scratched or damaged.
Cosmetic contact lenses are frequently bought without any healthcare professional being involved, market stalls, fancy dress costumes or online, and people don't get the proper advice that they should. Any contact lens needs to be sort of fitted to each individual person's eye. It needs to fit properly, and also how to look after them. So washing your hands, drying them before you put the lens in, making sure you clean them properly.
US aviation authorities are investigating whether any laws were broken after a low-flying pilot dropped live turkeys onto a festival in Arkansas. For more than 5 decades, the annual Yellville Turkey Trot has included a turkey drop in which the birds are then chased by festival goers. A local animal rights activist has filed a formal complaint alleging the pilot terrorized the birds and violated state laws against animal cruelty. The Federal Aviation Administration said it had not intervened in previous years because the birds were not considered projectiles.
Thanks, Jerry. As sexual harassment and rape allegations mount against the Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein, the actor Tippi Hedren says sexual harassment is nothing new in Hollywood and that Harvey Weinstein is not an anomaly. In her book, Tippi, a Memoir, the actress writes about how director Alfred Hitchcock harassed her and possibly damaged her career when she rejected his advances. James Cook has been talking to Ms. Hedren at her home in Southern California.
I was really angry that he would have pulled that on me. I mean, it was so unnecessary and just so degrading.
Because he was essentially saying, sleep with me or I'll ruin your career.
Exactly, that's exactly what he was saying. I just thought it was sad because we had such a good working relationship, everything was going so well. And then to have that thrown at me, and it was something that I could not and would not accept under any condition. But this doesn't just happen in Hollywood. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. The thought that, oh, it's macho, it's, you know, this is what boys do, this is what young men do, this is what men do, and that's just wrong. It's very wrong.
Have we reached a moment where people are beginning to accept that, do you think? Is something changing?
Well, I hope they realize that this has got to change. And women have to say, I don't have to put up with this. And I won't. No is a perfectly acceptable answer and should be respected. When I sailed out the door, when he said, I'll ruin your career, I said, do what you have to do. And I walked out the door. I slammed that door so hard. The entire crew, the film crew, knew what he was trying to do. And they knew that I was just in a day-to-day battle with just staying out of his way. And I remember we were in a building and there was an elevator. And Alma, his wife, Alma Hitchcock, was there, and she said, Tippi, I'm so sorry you have to go through this. But you could stop it.
And do you think the expose of Harvey Weinstein's behaviour is going to make it easier for women to say no?
Oh, I think it will. I think it will. I hope it will.
That was Tippi Hedren. Let's return now to our top story. The Spanish government has announced that it is taking steps to impose direct rule over Catalonia. Ministers will meet on Saturday to activate an article in the constitution which allows Madrid to take control of the province. The BBC's Tim Wilcox is in Barcelona and he's sent this assessment.
It was described as the nuclear option, and many people didn't think Madrid would do so. But after an exchange of letters between the Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont, and Mariano Rajoy, the Spanish Prime Minister, Madrid has decided to invoke Article 155. It restores direct rule to Madrid. It's an article that's never been used before, and it's part of the 1978 Constitution. It all flows from that referendum deemed illegal by Madrid, held on October the 1st, when the separatists say that 90% of the people who took part voted to leave Spain on a turnout of 43%. Madrid said, what are you doing, guys? This is illegal. We don't even recognise this referendum. Ever since then, there has been a game of political cat and mouse between both parliaments, and today it's been decided by Spain that they'll invoke Article 155. Meeting on Saturday will decide precisely which measures, for example, taking over the local police or various ministries, will be carried out by Madrid. But a hugely important constitutional crisis moment here for this country since the attempted coup, really, back in 1981.
And that's it for the newsroom. Thanks for listening.
You're with the BBC World Service, where we're exploring the lives, opportunities and daily challenges of women around the globe.
100 women on the BBC World Service.
This place offers a chance to build a different kind of society from the ground up.
Hopefully one day they will accept the idea that a woman can do something. A woman can be whatever she wants.
The thing is, you can't expect results immediately. You have to take everything one step at a time.
Join us
for a season of stories and solutions from 100 of the world's most inspiring women.
One of the most important messages that I can give is to try and strive to be more than you think you can. Because for me, I got to live my dream.
The BBC's 100 Women.
They need to know that these girls are their sisters and these girls need to be respected.
On radio, TV, and at bbcworldservice.com/100women.
Next on the BBC World Service, the food chain. What happens to your body when you eat 70 hot dogs in 10 minutes? And why would thousands of people watch you do it? We're exploring the curious appeal of competitive eating and its impact. We'll venture inside the stomach of a speed eater and ask what the popularity of the sport says about society's attitudes to food. All that after the news.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. The Spanish government has said it will start the process of stripping Catalonia's autonomous powers on Saturday, after the head of the regional government ignored its ultimatum to rescind his bid for independence. In a statement, the government said Cabinet would finalise measures for the Senate's approval under Article 155 of the Spanish Constitution. The Catalan leader, Carles Puigdemont, has threatened to have the regional parliament ratify independence if Madrid refuses to talk. Chinese state media says the country's leader, Xi Jinping, has been given his own political theory, which would entrench his position at the top of the ruling Communist Party. The state-run news agency Xinhua has quoted other senior leaders as saying the president's ideas would be known as Xi Jinping thought. Officials in Afghanistan say at least 43 soldiers have been killed in a Taliban attack on a military base in Kandahar province. A Defence Ministry statement said 9 soldiers had been wounded and 6 were still unaccounted for in the assault in the district of Maiwand. An anti-corruption court in Pakistan has brought charges against the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and his daughter over allegations linked to ownership of properties in London. Ms. Mariam's husband, Mohammed Safdar, has also been charged. They pleaded not guilty. New Zealand's Labour Party will form the country's new government in coalition with the small nationalist party New Zealand First and the Green Party. The Labour leader, Jacinda Ardern, who only took up the role in August, will be Prime Minister. One of the most enduring stars of French cinema, the actress Danielle Darrieux, has died at the age of 100, after a career spanning 8 decades. Starting at the age of 14, Danielle Darrieux played opposite some of the biggest stars of the day. And that's the BBC News.
Can't talk, too busy eating. Look at you, it's like someone sped you up.
I'm really nervous going against you for some reason.
I cannot believe what you've just done. You've just completely devoured that.
Pull it apart with your hands so you have to chew less.
It's like watching an animal.
Apologies for speaking with my mouth full. And welcome to The Food Chain, the weekly programme about the economics, science and culture of food. I'm Emily Thomas.
There's nothing pleasant about this at all. It's delicious, but what a waste of delicious meat.
This week, the gloves are off, and I'm getting stuck into the curiously fascinating and arguably nauseating world of competitive eating.
It's 4:17, I'm still on my ribs. Andre has devoured everything, he's almost at his burger.
I'm in Porky's barbecue restaurant in central London, trying to devour a huge plate of ribs, chicken wings and a double patty and pulled pork burger faster than a 23-year-old called Andre who works in an office nearby.
7 minutes 12. I've been eating meat solidly for 7 minutes and 18 seconds without stopping. Andre doesn't have time to talk to me now, he's too busy.
Corn on the cob last year, and that's 47 corn on the cob in 12 minutes. It was broken this year by my friend Carmen Sincati, but I'll get him next year.
What does the popularity of these events say about our relationship with food? Have many of us become so distant from how it's produced and so complacent about its availability that we're happy to treat it as an obstacle rather than something that sustains and nourishes us? In this episode, we're going to explore these questions and the impact competitive eating has on the body and mind.
I didn't enjoy that at all, and I was frustrated as I was eating it because I was thinking, this is lovely food and I'm not enjoying it and I'm mistreating this food.
I think it's the downside, because a lot of times the food is fantastic, but then when you're trying to go quick, all the flavors go by you so quickly that you kind of wish you'd slow down and savor the flavor. The actual kind of process is probably not that much fun, but just seeing the reactions on people's faces, the look on your face and the kind of giving up hope at the plate, it's fun. You kind of just base it on the crowd.
The table looks pretty disgusting, doesn't it? Mounds of napkins covered in barbecue sauce, bones, grease.
To be fair, we didn't get anything on the tables. We've done quite well.
I wasn't so sure. After the competition, I didn't feel well. I felt nauseous thinking about it, and for a day afterwards I had no appetite and a persistent headache. There's very little research into the health consequences of speed eating, or how some people are physically able to ingest vast quantities of food. But about 10 years ago, David Metz, a professor of medicine at the University of Philadelphia in the US, worked with a team of researchers to compare the stomach of one of the world's top competitive eaters with that of a control subject during a speed eating test.
If you raise the pressure in a bag, you'll stretch the wall and that would cause pain. So the speed eater has this ability to relax and expand their stomach and take in big volumes without increasing pressure, as opposed to you and I, after, 1 or 2 hot dogs, we'll start saying, well, this is starting to get uncomfortable, I'm getting a bit stretched and I'm getting a bit of pain.
How do competitive eaters develop that ability? Is this about training, or is it something they're born with?
We really don't know the answer to that because it hasn't been studied. I personally think that it's a little bit of both, but underlying it all, they have to have this inherent underlying ability to have a capacious stomach that can receptively relax and expand more so than the average person. And then whether they can train beyond that is not really been shown, but I think is a theoretical possibility. Now, the reason this is really interesting and of potential clinical value, it's for the reverse situation. So many people see doctors and gastroenterologists for abdominal pain. The medical term would be dyspepsia or indigestion. Those people, even after having small amounts of food, commonly describe postprandial, after meals, gastric distress syndrome. And the theory would be that if a speed eater can train up their stomach to do better, maybe doing loading tests or loading studies in dyspeptics could potentially help them to be able to tolerate bigger volumes of food without getting uncomfortable. So that's sort of the extrapolation that can be made from our data to say maybe there's a potential clinical utility of this in the long term.
As far as we know, what are the physical characteristics a person can have that would help them be a successful competitive eater?
You'd imagine big people would have big stomachs, little people would have little stomachs, but that's not necessarily true. And in fact, some of the speed eaters have been very small. What's required to be able to get a whole lot in, I imagine, is maybe a relatively larger stomach to start with, but most importantly, a stomach that can expand and relax.
How big does a competitive eater's stomach get? What did you find in your study?
Well, in our study, interestingly enough, his stomach got so big that it was larger than the radiology X-ray tube. So what we did there is we gave them some barium, which is radio opaque, to drink. We rolled them around on a table to coat the lining of the esophagus, stomach, and duodenum. And we took some X-ray pictures and set the size of the field to fill in the stomach. And then as they ate more and more and more, that stomach expanded. And in our speed eater's case, got so big that it was over the edge of the X-ray film.
In terms of centimetres, can you give us an idea of how big that was?
If you close your fist, I suppose that's about the size of your stomach at rest. In the normal individual, I think it would probably expand to about 3 or 4 or maybe 5 times that volume. In the competitive speed eater, it's going to be expanding to the size of, 80 hot dogs or whatever these guys ingest. So you can imagine the volume of food, and the stomach has to be about that big because it's got to go somewhere.
What are the dangers of competitive eating?
Well, we don't really know, and we can't quantify the true dangers of this behavior, but I would stress that it is something that has potential risk associated. There have been a couple of deaths actually relatively recently in people who got obstructed airways while doing an eating competition. The other possibility is while actually doing ingestion, the potential danger is from getting nauseated and stretching in the stomach and pain. People can actually vomit. You can vomit and aspirate, which could cause lung disease, pneumonia. You can vomit and tear the lining of the stomach or the esophagus and get bleeding. You can vomit and actually tear a through and through tear of the GI tract. That's a life-threatening condition. In terms of training, water loading is potentially extremely dangerous. In fact, that can be deadly. We also want to realize we're living in a world where obesity is an epidemic, especially in the developed world. And so we don't really want to foster bad behaviors. The other long-term risks we do not know.
I took part in a competitive eating competition, a small one. So for about 8 minutes, I was trying to eat as much meat as I could. I found that on my way home, I was sweating. My competitor called it the meat sweat. Really unpleasant. And the next day, I had something that felt like a hangover. What would have been going on there? Why would I have been having those physical reactions?
So it sounds like you're having a metabolic response to protein overload. All that protein gets delivered to your liver, and we know that there's a limit to how much the liver can deal with at a time. So I imagine that part of what you're talking about, this meat sweats, might relate to excessive protein loading. For example, people with cirrhosis of the liver, we often limit the amount of protein that they have in order to try and prevent them from getting hepatic encephalopathy or confusion related to liver dysfunction.
Right. Glad I did that. David Metz there. He argues that competitive eating events send out a message that the excessive consumption of junk food is something to be celebrated. Many competitions are over hot dogs, burgers, or pizza. Not the obvious setting, then, for someone like this.
I'm Carrie Meyer. I'm the Executive Director for Independent Health Foundation, a charitable arm for a local health plan here in Buffalo, New York. Our mission is to help improve the health of the community.
The kind of woman you can imagine singing the praises of a vegetable like kale. But perhaps not like this.
We looked at what activities are really not so healthy that we can make a spin on it and make it fun and unique. So we talked about a healthy eating competition. Kale, a couple years ago, we feel was, kind of trendy and new. But it also is called the king of vegetables. It's one of the healthiest vegetables there is. So we talked to some dietitians and some doctors and asked, could somebody eat too much kale? We're concerned about everybody's health. We made it an 8-minute eating competition so that somebody really couldn't gorge themselves too much. But the funny thing was, most of the dietitians and doctors said, you probably couldn't eat too much kale. We're not trying to showcase that gorging yourself with food is the way to go. We're trying to make a fun spin on what is already an activity that's happening, that maybe we can reverse the trend and make it all healthy eating versus hot dogs, chicken wings, hamburgers, donuts.
How many people entered the competition?
So we had 12, and this past year was our second annual Cal Yeah eating competition. There are 16-ounce containers that we put together. We cut all the stems out, and then they massage them in oil and vinegar to have them prepared for people to digest. The winner ate 25 containers.
That's more than 11 kilograms of kale in 8 minutes. It's still a lot of food. But does quality make up for quantity? David Metz isn't so sure.
By the time it leaves the stomach and gets into the small bowel, this is all ground up into a paste, and it doesn't really matter what you're eating in terms of the consistency. It's called chyme at that stage, C-H-Y-M-E. When you deliver chyme into the small bowel, whether it originated as hamburger or kale, I'm not sure that that's going to make much of a difference, although it will clearly make a difference in terms of the digestive enzymes and the processes involved in digesting and absorbing it. But I don't think you can safely say that speed eating with so-called healthy food is better than speed eating with a not-so-healthy food. It's a matter of volume, and you still run those risks.
Many competitive eaters, though, emphasise their healthy lifestyles outside the events with regular exercise and balanced diets. That's when they're not doing this kind of thing.
I can eat 80 chicken wings in 10 minutes, 5 pounds of boysenberry pie in 8 minutes, and 13 ice cream sandwiches in 6 minutes, but not all in the same meal.
Mary Bowers is from California and currently ranked at number 47 in the world by Major League Eating.
I find that there's so many cultural misunderstandings about the role of food and how it affects our bodies. And competitive eating, I think, puts it in a really positive light. It's sport, it's fun, it brings people together. And if you're ever looking for an advocate about food education or nutrition or fitness, you could talk to really any competitor.
What message are you trying to give out? You're up there on stage and you're eating as many hot dogs as you can, for example. What kind of message do you hope that that's giving other people about food and our relationship with food?
I meet a lot of people, especially young women, who quite simply are afraid of food and what it will do to their bodies. They think a bite of one cupcake is going to add 10 pounds. And it's simply not true. Our bodies are amazing. They can adapt to a lot of different circumstances. And that's where I think being up on that stage and showing that when you're met with a challenge and you keep pushing, a lot of times you can be surprised about what you can accomplish. If you zoom out and you look at the life of a competitive eater as a whole, on a daily basis, there's a fitness routine, there's different nutrition requirements. And the thing that I've also learned in talking to other people in the sport is how different all of our bodies are. And you can't judge somebody and their abilities based on their outside appearance.
For Mary, competitive eating promotes positive messages about food and body shape. But others go even further and say it can help people recover from eating disorders.
My name is Eric Lampkin, also known as Eric the Electric on YouTube. I do eating challenges, eating contests, big eating feats, and I love food.
Eric Lampkin is a 24-year-old student, also from California, who was severely anorexic in his teens.
So in 2012, I entered into treatment for anorexia nervosa, and I had been suffering from an eating disorder for about 4 years, which involved chronic undereating, hours upon hours of cardio a day to maintain my weight, to maintain a body that I was never really satisfied with. And after being in treatment for 2 months, I decided to enter into my first restaurant challenge. And I ended up setting the record and even got offered a job by the manager there. And he said, you know, this is insane. And then 2 months after that, I did another one. And then I did my first contest. And I started my YouTube channel, and 4 years later today, here we are, and I have 37 million total channel views, and I have 200,000 people that subscribe to me.
What's in your videos? What are they like?
So I'll go around to various, fast food restaurants, and I'll get a bunch of food, or I'll try to break world records, or I'll try to, I'll just do something crazy, because people just want to see you eat more and more.
Who is it that's watching your channel, do you think?
It's almost like a daily occurrence. I get people with eating disorders that send me their stories and tell me how much I've helped them. I wouldn't say that the majority of my audience has an eating disorder that watches my videos, but I would say that a good amount of people that watch my videos do have eating disorders.
When you started to enter these competitive eating contests, were you over the anorexia, or was this part of your recovery?
I was still going through my eating disorder when I did my first food challenge. By the time I got to my first eating contest, I would say that I was over my anorexia and I was recovered.
And how did taking part in this eating competition and the ones that followed help keep you on this path to recovery?
A lot of people say, and it's a big thing within recovering anorexics, that they fear going to the other side of the spectrum where you're binge eating. Once I kind of did my first contest and realized that, like, wow, I'm not one of those people that will literally sit there for 3 or 4 hours and just eat, I realized that I wasn't going to go to the opposite side of the spectrum.
What did your parents think, or your friends?
I got a lot of positive feedback. Every once in a while I'd get one person that would question me. I'd get people from treatment that were telling me that what you were doing with your life is the wrong way to handle recovery, but there is no definition to recovery from an eating disorder. Recovery is defined by yourself. And for me, I'm defining my own method of recovery.
Eric Lampkin. You're listening to The Food Chain on the BBC World Service with me, Emily Thomas. And this week, we're finding out what competitive eating does to our bodies, our minds, and the societies we live in. We've just heard from Eric, who says it helped him recover from anorexia nervosa. Dr. Frances Connon is a consultant psychiatrist in London. Does she think competitive eating can be helpful to people with eating disorders?
Eating disorders tend to have a really marked impact on the quality and quantity of people's relationships, and the low self-esteem and lack of self-worth makes it very difficult for people to connect with others. So I guess I can see that competitive eating has been a way in which people have made connections with others, and it's given them some sense of value.
But surely this is encouraging an obsession with food, when a healthy relationship with food would be not to be obsessive at all.
Absolutely. Food is just fuel. We all need food just to live our day-to-day lives, and it would be far healthier if people just ate for eating's sake and not for competition and not for an eating disorder. It just is another extreme obsessional way of relating to food, and extremely obsessional relationships with food are just not healthy. I'd also have some health concerns about making the switch from being very restrictive in eating to essentially binge eating, which for someone who's been very restrictive could actually be rather dangerous for their health.
When does extreme behaviour towards food become unhealthy? Because there's a lot of competitive eaters who would say, I'm an athlete, I eat really, really healthily the whole time, but a couple of times a month I go and I eat vast amounts of food in a competitive way, and it's good fun.
You know, I guess if you can be healthy and eat healthily the rest of the time and you get, fun from competitive eating, on some level, I guess that's fine. I mean, it's not for me. I wouldn't recommend it.
You look slightly pained when we're talking about competitive eating competitions.
I feel slightly pained just at the thought of it. I think it's testament to
the best tasting. They had to do something with the leftovers because only a little bit of the pie would ever be tasted. So the young men would try and see who could eat the most.
Vivian mentioned gluttony there, something often frowned upon, even seen as a sin. Competitive eating, though, is seen by many as something to celebrate. So what's the difference?
Gluttony as a sin is seen in the overindulgence in things you find pleasurable, and the activity of competitive eating is almost entirely divorced from the gustatory element, so there's no pleasure involved. It's a feat of sheer strength. And so in that regard, people understand it along the dynamics that they use for sports. So that's why it's less of an outcry.
What is the attraction in watching these events?
There's a thrill of the possibility of watching someone embarrass themselves by throwing up. Watching someone eat just one too many hot dogs or one too many cupcakes or whatever it is, we all hold our breath thinking, oh no, he's going to throw up. Let's watch him throw up. Because it's the outward expression of the shame we feel when we eat to excess that is the very cathartic moment. So people want to see whether the competitors master their own body and can perform feats that are worthy of admiration, or if they absolutely collapse in defeat, and then we can all sympathize with a sense of disgust because we've been there.
What do these eating competitions say about society and its attitude to the industrialized food system?
How little food matters. And it makes us perhaps aware that that's how we consume as well. So it could be seen as a reflection of how American society regards processed foods as non-consequential. More and more there's a disconnect between what we eat and what we think of in terms of pleasure or nutrition. So with the rise of processed foods, it's not a very long jump to assume that people would eat things that are not related to hunger. But at the same time, it could also be seen as a reflection of how much we have gotten away from food we make ourselves. We are not growing our own food, cooking our own food. Food is just one other thing we use to test ourselves against. Everything we normally do, we find a way to make it competitive. So I think it says more about our competitive nature than it does a wholesale indictment of the food system.
Vivian Halloran bringing us to the end of our journey into the curious world of competitive eating. Whether you think it's a harmless bit of fun or something that reflects and exacerbates major global problems with the food system, there's one thing we can be sure about. Speed eating does carry risks, so please don't try it at home. We'd love to know what you think. Find us on social media using the hashtag BBC Food Chain. You'll find a video there of my own attempt too. For now, from me, Emily Thomas, producer Nishi Sundar and editor Simon Tulett, thanks for listening and join us again for The Food Chain next week.
This is the BBC World Service, where we're looking for solutions to the problem of domestic violence.
100 women on the BBC World Service.
The domestic violence will always happen if the men keep thinking that they have the right to hit the woman, and if the wife keep thinking that they deserve to hit by the man.
Behind closed doors. Listen to the whole series at bbcworldservice.com/100women. You're listening to the BBC World Service.
Our Latin America online editor is Vanessa Bushluter, and she is...
Let's speak now to our Moscow correspondent, Steve Rosenberg. And Steve,
our correspondent, Bethany Bell, has been following the UN talks.
Our South America correspondent, Katie Watson, spoke to us from Sao Paulo.
At bbcworldservice.com, this is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to Outlook, the programme that takes you around the world through extraordinary personal stories. I'm Matthew Bannister. Today, the country singer who helped fans to escape America's worst mass shooting of modern times.
We thought it was fireworks at the beginning, about the first 3 rounds. And all I remember is the guy about 10 feet in front of us goes down. The guy to the right of him about 4 feet over goes down. And when I look over my shoulder to the right, 2 girls go down. And at that time, I kind of froze.
Brian Hopkins led a group of people into a freezer trailer to hide from the gunfire.
I got up to open up the door, and it sounded like the gunfire was right next to us. And at that point, I went to reach for my phone because people were calling loved ones. And I thought, I'm going to make a video for my family.
Hear Brian's dramatic story in full on today's Outlook after the latest BBC News.
Hello, I'm Jerry Smith with the BBC News. The Spanish government says it will start the process of stripping Catalonia's autonomous powers on Saturday after the head of the regional government ignored its ultimatum to rescind his bid for independence. Here's Mike Sanders.
In a statement, the government said Cabinet would finalise measures for the Senate's approval under Article 155 of the Spanish Constitution, allowing for what it called the restoration of legality in Catalonia's self-government. It's never been done before. The move came after the Catalan leader, Carles Puigdemont, threatened to have the regional parliament ratify independence if Madrid refused to talk. In a letter to the Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, he said the independence declaration he made last week remained suspended, but he could now follow through on putting it to the vote in the Catalan parliament, where he has a working majority.
Chinese state media says the country's leader, Xi Jinping, has been given his own political theory. The state-run news agency Xinhua has quoted other senior leaders as saying the president's ideas would be known as Xi Jinping thought. Michael Bristow reports.
So far, we only have a vague sense of what Xi Jinping thought stands for. The party says it's socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. That's a difficult phrase to understand, but to a large extent the fundamentals of this new theory are unimportant. This announcement is notable mainly because of its symbolism. Xi Jinping has become the first Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping to lend his name to a political theory, suggesting his authority extends further than China's previous 2 presidents. And before, the only Chinese leader to have his own thought was Mao Zedong.
China says more than 1 in 10 senior leaders has been investigated for corruption over the last 5 years. State media says 43 full and backup members of the governing Communist Party's Central Committee have been accused. Earlier this month, the Chinese authorities said more than 1.3 million low-level officials had faced corruption investigations. Officials in Afghanistan say at least 43 soldiers have been killed in a Taliban attack on a military base in Kandahar province. Here's Ambarasan Etirajan.
The ferocious Taliban assault began with an explosive packed vehicle ramming the entrance of the Afghan military compound before the militants stormed in. Reports say only a handful of soldiers are known to have survived unscathed after the attack. At least 9 Taliban militants were also reported killed. It's the third major Taliban attack on security installations this week, taking the number of killed to more than 100, including soldiers, police and civilians. There will be questions over high number of Afghan casualties even after the US doubled its air support under a new Afghan strategy announced by President Trump.
World news from the BBC. An anti-corruption court in Pakistan has brought charges against the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and his daughter over allegations linked to ownership of properties in London. Ms. Mariam's husband, Mohammed Safdar, has also been charged. All 3 have pleaded not guilty. The Nigerian Air Force has deployed combat aircraft to the Central Plateau state as the authorities try to stop an outbreak of violence. On Monday, at least 29 people who'd been sheltering in a primary school were killed when it was stormed by armed men. That attack was apparently a response to the earlier killing of 6 cattle herders. After finishing second in New Zealand's general election, the main opposition Labour Party is forming a new government in coalition with the smaller New Zealand First Party, with the Greens expected to offer parliamentary support. Labour's 37-year-old leader, Jacinda Ardern, who only took up the role in August, galvanised Labour's fortunes when polls had predicted the governing National Party would easily win a 4th term. She said the real work still lay ahead.
I feel extraordinarily honoured and privileged to be in the position to form a government with Labour at the lead. We campaigned hard on issues that we believed strongly on, and now we take very seriously the responsibility that we have to deliver on them.
New Zealand First, which held the balance of power after September's poll, has common ground with Labour on a number of key policies, including limiting immigration. One of the most enduring stars of French cinema, the actress Danielle Darrieux, has died at the age of 100 after a career spanning 8 decades. Her partner said she'd recently suffered a fall. Starting at the age of 14, Danielle Darrieux played opposite some of the biggest names of the day, both in France and in Hollywood, including Jean Gabon and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. BBC News.
I'm Matthew Bannister and you're with Outlook. Today, are you familiar with any of these words?
Zwir. An Exmoor word for the whirring noise made by a group of birds as it takes flight. Shivelight and shadow tackle. A pair of words for the fast-moving lances of light and shade that fall through the canopy of a wood or a forest on a bright and windy day. Wolflight. Twilight. The period in the day when the familiar becomes wild, when dog turns to wolf.
We'll be hearing more from the British author who's determined to get you using those words. Also today, the young Zimbabwean mother of 5 with no education who wrote down her dreams and buried them in the ground. We'll find out if she made them come true. And we'll take a little trip to see the world's oldest tortoise on the remote island of St. Helena. But first, on Sunday the 1st of October, the USA experienced its worst mass shooting in modern history. Stephen Paddock from the state of Nevada opened fire on people attending a country music festival in Las Vegas. He shot at the crowd with an automatic rifle from his hotel room, killing 58 people and injuring more than 500 others. Brian Hopkins is the lead singer of a band called Elvis Monroe, who'd played at the festival before. But this year, he was just there to listen to the music as an audience member. He told us about the atmosphere before the shooting began.
Here's a song we all learned in about the 1st grade. Let's sing it together. Sing God bless
It was beautiful. It was a beautiful day out. People are running around in shorts and cowboy boots. I mean, it was country music. So many people coming together, thousands of people, and nothing other than just great music, great entertainment. I mean, Big and Rich were on stage. You know, I just remember a moment where they had everybody turn their lights on their cameras and just lit up the place. So there's thousands of lights in the air, and it was awesome. And I saw a couple of girls that had asked to take a photo with me the day before. So we ended up sneaking up right behind them, tapped them on the shoulder, and I joked around and called them my echoes because both their names were Nicole, and I remember that when they introduced themselves to me the day before.
The two girls joined Brian and his bandmate Ben to enjoy the concert, but the mood changed after the main act, Jason Aldean, had taken to the stage.
And it was about 4 songs into it when things started to go badly. We thought it was fireworks at the beginning, about the first 3 rounds. And all I remember is the guy about 10 feet in front of us goes down. The guy to the right of him about 4 feet over goes down. And when I look over my shoulder to the right, 2 girls go down. And at that time, I kind of froze. And Ben grabs my shoulder and says, "Run." And he takes off running almost directly behind me. But I reached out and grabbed the 2 girls in front of me. I grabbed their hands. And I just kind of weaved these girls through the crowd. And I had lost Ben because Ben fell down and got ran over. And all we're hearing is their shots firing, people screaming.
Brian remembered a route out of the stadium near the backstage area, but when he got there, it was fenced off, so he needed to find another way out. By now, a group of people were following him.
I noticed a refrigerator trailer, and there was someone standing in the doorway, just kind of, it was peaked. It was kind of, the door was kind of open a little bit. And when we ran over there, they opened up the door, and I started to lift the 2 Nicoles inside and stood there helping anyone who wanted inside. It was cold. The 2 girls that I was with, both the Nicoles, were trying to calm down. One girl who was screaming hysterically, and we were trying to stay quiet.
Not sure what's going on out there. Nothing. We're in this ice cooler right now.
And I kept pacing back and forth, and there was one gentleman who was screaming, punching the walls. He was being obnoxious. He was opening up a cooler and wanting a beer, and he kept saying it. And I don't know what he was thinking. I think, being in the sun, having alcohol all day, maybe not being able to compute what was going on. But at one point, I got up to open up the door, and it sounded like the gunfire was right next to us. And at that point, I went to reach for my phone because people were calling loved ones, and I thought, I'm going to make a video for my family.
It's okay. Some sort of shooting or something at Jason Aldean concert.
We opened up the door, me and a couple of guys, and someone, and I want to say it was a catering company that was outside of it, through the ramp that led into the refrigerator. They threw it over the fence. It was kind of steep and hard to get up over, but when we opened up the door, it was there, and there was breaking gunfire. So I started helping people out of the refrigerator onto the ground, and the girls started helping people over. There was a guy who jumped over the fence and was catching people on the other side. Everyone was helping each other get up over the fence.
Many people escaped over that fence, but not everyone could make it.
But it came down to the one girl who was hysterical. I remember her saying that she screamed and started crying, panicking again, that she can't jump the fence because she just had back surgery. So I told her I would jump over first ahead of her and catch her, and she'd be fine. But when it came down to it, I thought there was only 3 of us left. Everyone had been over the fence, and I went to go help the girls, and they wouldn't leave me. They were like, "We're not leaving without you." And so I told them, "You go, and I'm right behind you." And I tried to get them up, and they started slipping. The one Nicole had, her boots were slipping on this metal. So I just grabbed her by the waist off of it about midway up, grabbed the other Nicole, and said, "We're going to find another way out." And I look to my right, and I hear over my left shoulder, "This way, this way." It was a police officer who came running at us, waving his arms, pointing in what direction to go, and then took off in what I called hell. He took off to all the screaming, the gunfire, right into it. And so I grabbed the Nicoles, and I just started running along the wall, the direction that he told us to go. So he pointed us to safety. And so we ran out, and it was the scariest part was seeing bodies. We just kept everybody quiet, and we hid in there, again, which felt like forever.
The alert turned out to be a false alarm, so once the fear had subsided a little, Brian gathered a small group of people and led them out of the city centre. Then he took a taxi home. The following week, he and his band played some concerts to raise money for the victims of the shooting.